Hey everyone, this is Christoph here, speaking from the Bitcoin design account. Sorry for the confusion. Had a whole Twitter space scheduled there, and then trying to start it, got a ton of error messages. So we gave up on that one, created a new one, and now here we are. How's everyone doing today? I'm still inviting a few people here.
All good, all good. Yeah, I saw some people messaging me about the issue as well, but yeah, hopefully we get the rest of people on board.
A good new feature about spaces is that it'll actually be recorded for 30 days. Because previously I think they were instantly deleted after it was over. So now at least there's a 30-day history for people to listen back in.
Is
Oh,
it even a
nice.
Twitter space if there are no issues?
Yeah, it just keeps you on your toes. That's what it's meant to do.
Yeah, thanks for handling all the tech.
Good. Just trying to get Patricia to accept her status here, speaker status. And then otherwise we've had three topics that people proposed. One of them was Patricia. She wanted to give an update on the merchant section that she's investigating for the Bitcoin Design Guide, which I'm sure Pavel will be pretty happy about too, with his involvement with BTC Pay. Then we might have, maybe DM is here under a different name, different pseudonym here, so. But he said that he might be available to talk about accessibility, I believe. He joined us once before, and I think he's from Nigeria and pretty involved in the communities there. Might be slightly mixing things up, but I believe that was the story. And then the third one was sustainability, sustaining open source design, which is something that I feel pretty strongly about. Patricia's having some problems here joining in. Would you like to talk about something else in the meantime? And everybody listening in, feel free to raise your hand, chat in, ask questions. Daniel, what are you up to these days or today?
Today, well, I'm not on a bike, which I sometimes am when these meetings are. I am in Porto, where the sun is setting over a blue sky day. Had a really nice time. But otherwise, this year I've been trying to figure out what to get stuck into in the Bitcoin design community. The guide work on Lightning is obviously wrapping up, which is amazing. Which brings us into a little new phase where we can tackle more things, other things, new things, which is exciting. Yeah, so I've been pondering that.
Yeah, that's a big one. Seems like Patricia will is going to need a minute. And the DM has not showed up. So how about we just start with my topic, which is open design sustainability, and it's something that's been back in my mind for a long time, because it's obviously pretty important for all of this work to be done and for people to join and feel valued. And so last in late December, Connor and I were on a podcast called Sustaining Open Source Design. You should definitely check out that podcast because they basically deal with that topic quite a bit. And I don't think there's a lot of conversation happening on this topic. I've really, in the last year and a half of being involved with Bitcoin design, I haven't really heard much about it, any discussion. So I think there might be a lot of designers that they just come into open source, open design, and they're like, okay, am I supposed to do all of this stuff for free now? So what do I get out of it? And of course, there's a core of open source where you do these things because you care, because they're awesome, and you want to see them happen in the world. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who simply do not have the space in their lives, the time in their lives to just put away to put aside this time and dedicate this time to work on those things that they really want to. And then the topic of sustainability and compensation is something that becomes pretty important. Because I think about that sometimes too on the community management side. People join in, and ideally everybody just kind of starts helping out and all of this stuff. But can you really ask people that people just show up and say like, "Hey, here, spend all your time and energy doing all this for free"? And another side to this is that in the design community, it's actually there's kind of a stigma around doing work for free. Lots of designers have had bad experiences around where some client just says, if you work for my company, you can put it on your portfolio, just do it for free, or can you just design this for free? We'll give you other projects to do. So there's actually kind of a stigma around this idea of doing anything for free. And so the idea of open source actually really doesn't mesh with a lot of people. It's something that they're instantly kind of careful about. So I think for me, it's a pretty complex topic, but I also think it's pretty important. And I just don't see enough conversation happening. That's why I wanted to bring that up. I have some other thoughts on this, but I didn't want to just keep talking the whole time here. So far, does anybody else want to talk about this topic or share some thoughts?
Yeah, I can share some thoughts just so that Papa Christoph does not have to talk the entire time. So, in my opinion, getting compensated in open source is a very tricky subject, and it all comes down to people giving more than they're taking. I recently did a podcast about this. I think it will be out soon, but people expecting right away to be compensated for their work, I think it's a very wrong mindset in open source, because open source is about you giving something and then building out basically your portfolio, your name through open source, so that you can get your name out and become a person that you otherwise wouldn't through open source. Like, you get lots of opportunities, you get to talk to lots of smart folks, collaborate with them. And I think if people approach this as in a way that I guess I'm contributing to open source so that I can learn, become a better person, do some good stuff, then funding will come organically, I think, because it all comes down to meritocracy and how much people are contributing. If you get a new contributing community just wanting to contribute and get compensated, that's very tricky, and that potentially can even be dangerous for the community itself. Because imagine if there was a new contributor that never did anything for community, and then they get funding and other people don't even know who they are. How do they give them access to anything, and how do they trust them? So there is a little bit of trust and credibility that you first need to gain in order to get funded. That's I guess, my angle. So does anybody else has any thoughts about this? We also have Steve on. I'm not sure if he's able to join the conversation, but he may have some thoughts on this subject as well.
Yeah, I wanted to share something the way that I've been thinking about it, which might be pretty important. So the compensation can mean many different things. I think the smallest thing that exists are tips. A lot of people have GitHub sponsors page or some other mechanism or so where when somebody really likes their work, they'll just send them a few euros or dollars or so, and they can buy a beer. It's kind of it's a recognition. It's just like tipping. And nobody expects there to be to earn a living from it, and the person doing the work also doesn't really expect for huge companies or to create the most essential things. It's a small thing, and that's maybe a good start. Another thing some people do are individual sponsors, which I think Patreon, GitHub sponsors are some of these mechanisms that instead of giving just like a small tip one time, it maybe becomes a regular thing. So if somebody's just generally over time thinks the else's work is valuable, that's a mechanism. The other thing is community funding and bounties, where a company or a community or a project says like, "Hey, here's something we want done. Somebody please do this." That's kind of the pull aspect of this. Say the most, I don't know, mercenarial, I guess. And then, you get into other things like grants. And then on top of that, there's another approach that you can do, which is complementary businesses, where somebody does a certain amount of work for free, and then maybe they sell a book about, I don't know, designing for mobile, or they sell certain design resources, or something else where the majority of their work is they do it for free because they love it, and then there's something complementary that helps them. So I think it can take on many different shapes, and maybe people are not so aware of it. And it probably takes time for individuals to also find something that works for them and who they want to be in this open source space.
Hey, Christoph, I added a speaker. So, David, I don't know if you wanted to jump in, but I did just add you as a speaker if you had something you want to say.
Hey, yeah. I was going to follow up. It was actually a lot what Christoph was sort of saying there. So it's a really interesting discussion, and it's a really interesting talking point. Just from my own experience as being a designer, like growing up through my career, I would have usually told people never work for free. But that's obviously whenever you're doing commercial work. So whenever you're going in to look at things from like an open source perspective, it does change things. But you still have to be careful, I think. Just whenever it's almost like a topic around privilege and stuff like that, because I know sometimes like I've been challenged before, or I've suggested to people, well, I'll do this bit of work for free, and then I know like down the line it'll be worth it for me. But then some people will challenge me and go, "Oh, that's actually just really showing your privilege, because you know the fact that you're able to go and do this work for free, other people can't." So I think there's that side of the coin where you have to be very careful at the same time. So I think what Christoph said about like bringing tips into it, and maybe like it, I think ultimately it depends on the actual project. So if the project has any sort of commercial value, then I think people should be getting paid for it. But if there is some sort of funding pot, it could also be good to try and funnel people some sort of tip for their work. But I think just ultimately as well, the main thing I think for my side of the coin is like, it's all about what you get out of it. So I think if people are contributing to like a project, you just need to push them to the front of the line and go like, look, these are the people that are helping us out, and really champion the sort of designers that are working on something. So that can be a form of compensation too. So I think that's just sort of my thoughts on the conversation at the moment. So that's me done speaking. Thanks very much for listening.
I think one thing that also gets a bit complicated is when you start collaborating with multiple people, right? Then, so let's say, I'm working on a project, sorry, on a task or something, and then there's other people who I'm collaborating with or just sharing knowledge with and stuff like that. How do they get paid? Do I have to manage that and all that? It can get quite complicated in the open source realm.
I see Daniel's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to just reflect a bit on design versus developers and open source. I think in the kind of code world, open source is much more understood and commonplace, right? There's so much code out there that you can use if you're a developer that other people have contributed to, and it's kind of accepted that there's a lot of value in giving back to the community by open sourcing code that you might have written. In the design world, there's a lot less of that, right? There's not yet that understanding of why it's valuable for a designer to do that, and there's also, of course, less. There are less opportunities to just pick someone else's design and stuff it in your product, right? So it's less mature. So I think that's one point to keep in mind, and maybe think about how can we make the value clearer to designers who are used to either charging for their work or not seeing much value coming back if they share it. The second thought I had was just around sustainability, right? Like one way of having a sustainable open source community is this idea of people doing things for free, which I think has to be there. If you don't have that component, it's it's going to be hard to keep it going, I think. But on the other hand, there's definitely value in finding ways of funding people. So I think the combination of having a group that contributes because they believe in the receiving some form of value that is non-monetary, whether it's learnings, some form of status within the community, if you can talk about that. But then, yeah, the sustainability does probably at some point need to think about money and funding. Sorry, I was rambling a bit there, but I'll hand it over to someone else to clarify my thoughts.
No, I think those are great points. And maybe what we should do is document it too, because not everybody really hops on these spaces. I'm just looking at the numbers, it's just a small fraction. But I do think like open source design in general, outside of Bitcoin too, it's just not that explored or documented. So maybe part of what we could do this year is work on articulating something into either a document or motion graphics or some sort of video, just to help people understand. I think this is a really awesome discussion that deserves more time too. I don't see DM here. I'm just gonna hop in. Does anyone else have any more points? Pablo next wanted to say something. Is that a hand?
Yeah, Patricia, that's my hand in the air. I just wanted to add, like, quite briefly about documenting things. In my experience, like, you can do the best job documenting things, but the thing that drags people into contributing and into becoming open sourcers is that one-on-one conversation that they get from their peers in community. So you can have videos, we do have videos, we can have documentation, excellent documentation. People don't read that. The most people in open source are there for the human aspect, being feeling as a part of one bigger community, just feeling of getting accepted. And then the most important thing is how does their work give them meaning. And once you get that with the contributor, that their work gives meaning, I think that's how you get the best contributors in open source. And then after that comes sustainability. And I'm speaking this from my experience. I'm sure that there are like so many variations of this. In my experience, tips that do not work, tips aren't equal sustainability, for example. But yeah, maybe that's a topic for some other discussion. I just wanted to quickly chime in that very important to get meaning through that work, and then sustainability comes later on. Because yeah, most people want to creatively express themselves, and I think we are lacking that aspect in our community. We need to open doors for more people through allowing them to creatively express themselves in so many ways, and then they will become part of, you know, the community.
For sure, I'd agree. I saw another hand, so if you want to take it away, go for it.
Yeah, it was just to sort of follow up on what Pavel was saying there as well. And one thought that popped into my head, and it just of sort of one way of giving people value that's not monetary, is just the design resource itself. So even though the design resource is available for everyone for free and it's open source, us able to champion that resource and actually educate people how to use it is a really valuable thing that people can learn. So if designers come on board and actually use that resource as a way of thought, it's actually a really valuable thing for them to do, in a similar way that like developers might use a new development kit and just as a learning experience. Designers coming in and learning about Bitcoin is sort of a way of is a valuable thing, if that makes sense. So that just popped into my head, and it could be something worth championing. So thank you.
Great points. Does anyone else want to speak on this topic before we move on? I'm just kind of keeping an eye on the time. I know we got started a little later, so we have some buffer, but roughly halfway through what we would typically do in an hour time frame. If not, we can definitely move on to some of the next topics. Anybody else? Cool. Well, I will take it from here because I know Christoph is going lighter on the speaking today, which didn't actually happen, but he's got a bit of a cough, so I'm gonna take the lead here. We do have a community newsletter that went out today, so for those of you who are maybe newer or haven't signed up yet, we have Bitcoin design updates. Our 21st update came out, just kicking off the new year. We discuss jam sessions, new member mixers, basically things that are happening where if you didn't have a chance to be on Slack, you can kind of quickly get the bullet points, the highlights. Stephen maybe wants to talk about some blog posts. It's in here. We have the FOSDEM presentation coming up, so there's going to be John's and Christoph again are going to take the lead on that. We have some updates from the Albi team. Hello Bitcoin had an awesome video about environmental impact, which some people on this call I think contributed to. Bitcoin Smiles has a redesign, which is now available in Spanish. And there are a few more items that were auctioned off from illustrators in our community. So if you'd like to check that out, if it's something you're interested in, go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. We also have a calendar with more meetings if you're new here. Stephen, did you want to talk about your blog post at all? I see you're just a listener. If you want to raise your hand at some point, we can get you as a speaker. If not, that's totally fine too. I am going to do a quick talk and hopefully open this up for more ideas about the merchant section. So about 6 months ago, we had a few meetings where we talked about the merchant section for the design guide that I was hoping to do. And for those who are newer, who maybe don't know about BTC Pay Server or about the design guide in general is at bitcoin.design. And so for the merchant section, just really briefly, it's growing, and there was a version 1. We're getting a version 2 out. So my hope is that we could have a section that's mostly focused on building wallets that are more focused on point of sale, on Lightning invoices, and also working with individuals, activists, and businesses who are using open source software to accept Bitcoin. And so what I had done for the first UX strategy was just figure out what the motivations were for the personas that we had. And I think this was something that Pavlinex and a few others had mentioned, is just figure out why people are using this and what it means to them. So in October at the Oslo Freedom Forum, worked with a group of activists, and for them, their motivations were mostly they needed Bitcoin. It wasn't something that was an extra luxury on top of the fiat. The nature of the work that they were doing required more private and secure systems for them to be able to do things like there was the Belarus Free Theater, who talks about a lot of, yes, they're awesome. And then we had a couple other groups who I think maybe want to keep more private, but folks out of Russia, folks out of West Africa, and I don't, last thing I want to do is dox anyone. But the reason why Bitcoin is important, the reason why using BTC Pay Server is important for them too, is they may not have a lot of money to get started. And frankly, running some of this hardware could be quite illegal where they're at. So that was a conversation that's different than maybe a storefront who's selling pizza, or an individual who's doing a DAO and wants to get started with Bitcoin. So for me, that kind of opened up a lot more opportunities for how we might be able to work with BTC Pay Server and more cloud platforms. We use Luna Node, which was awesome. I think ideally everyone would be running their own hardware, but I also realized for some people, say you're in Pakistan, that could be like gold for you, for someone to, they might rob you. And if you're a woman, or if you're someone who is not encouraged to work, there could be physical threats. So figuring out ways in which we can not just make this a merchant section in the design guide that's focused on a more Western perspective, perhaps like someone in the US, or even people in El Salvador who are using it too. They have their own unique experiences. So getting these personas and making sure that we are figuring out ways in which our design guide is reflecting different ways of living. So I had broken it down into 2 sections, working with both the people who were accepting Bitcoin and builders too. So the first section, I'm working on an overview, types of users, barriers to entry, getting started, and basics. I figured most people would know about Lightning, but I was really surprised how most people didn't understand the difference between on-chain wallets and Lightning wallets, and they would often think people weren't paying them, but really it was just going to a different wallet in general. So I think what I would like to propose is some UX explorations around that, and maybe pitching them to the community within the next month or two, and seeing how we might be able to use visuals to help people understand what a basic flow might look like. And how we would communicate with users' needs. So how we can support new people who are aiming to accept payments. I think there was a lot of enthusiasm, especially with businesses and individuals who are wanting to work with Bitcoin, but there wasn't a lot of understanding exactly how it works. And I think people felt, frankly, overwhelmed. I think it takes quite a bit of one-on-one time. So what I had done is set up a couple BTC Pay Server instances with people, and I would do meetings maybe for an hour or two weekly, and we would talk about how we might be able to improve this for them. But often I found that people who were newer just gave up, or they accepted donations for their nonprofit or initiative, but they weren't feeling like it was successful enough, or they were getting the amount of Bitcoin that they wanted to keep up with the education. So that, I think, was a really difficult part that I would like us to maybe figure out how we could do better. And if anybody in the call has any ideas around that too. Right now, I think we basically have what the needs of the three personas are, with individual, business, and activists, what works well, and what some of the pain points are. And I'd like to share a document too. It's a little harder on Twitter Spaces, but I would like to do that in Slack or on GitHub. So my main questions for moving forward in the future are, how could, and maybe you guys could help me with this and moving forward. I just wrote down, how might we imagine interaction design on a mobile and wallet specifically being executed in a way that feels more natural? I realize this could be very culturally specific, but that was one of the points that I would like to explore next. And what feelings should users have as people who are both making payments, if you're on the merchant side, and if you're also someone building? What feelings should you have when you're taking this journey from discovery to exploration to point of sale? So a lot of people don't trust this, or they're afraid of losing their money, is something people have voiced to me. And in what ways can we see BTC Pay Server and more open source software working with bridging this gap between people who are wanting to accept Bitcoin and people who don't have the understanding to do so? How can we, as a community, get there with visual identity? And how can we work on, not just on UX and UI generally, but setting up things like one-on-ones and helping people onboard? So if you guys have any ideas, I would love to just open this up, and hopefully I can provide a little bit more context outside of Twitter Spaces, but I would love to just open this up to anybody who has thoughts here. Yes, Pav, I was hoping you'd jump in.
Yeah, whenever I hear merchants and payments, I have to raise my hand and speak. So I will be very,
Of course.
hopefully concise, but yeah, that's hard with me. But one thing about categorization of these users or merchants, I think it is very, on the highest level, the way I see it, it should be distinguished in a way that you have online and physical merchants. In my experience, that's like, that's where the flows completely differ. Like, these two type of users have completely different needs and completely different motivations, and they have completely different flows of accepting payment and handling Bitcoin. And one more thing that I found super helpful is just figuring out why it is that merchants stop accepting Bitcoin. If you remember, like in 2013, 14, we had like so many merchants on board, and it is important that we figure out, why did they give up? Was it the lack of people actually using Bitcoin as a payment? Was it the thing that customer support queries were too technical and they weren't able to handle it? So I think also looking through customer support tickets and figuring out merchants and the way they handle refunds and things like that are also very important and could be very helpful for someone building a Bitcoin application. Just figuring out not only the flows but also like the refunding and things like that. So yeah, that's enough for me. Hopefully, I'm certain that Jones has quite a few thoughts on merchants and maybe federated instances and things like that. But yeah, I will let him maybe tackle this topic if he wants to.
Definitely. I'd love to hear from Johns, but I also just added a speaker too. So Tina, if you had any thoughts, I would love to hear what you got.
Can you hear me? Confirm?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. To answer the question that Palvnik asked, I too had started a year ago in regards to pay the BTC Pay server. It was extremely overwhelming, and I thought that it would actually be a lot easier, but it was extremely overwhelming at the time. Few were actually merchants. Few merchants had been on it, so I had to ask around, and it was often I was getting like.
Did you have problems connecting or something wrong on my side?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Oh, I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're good on my end. Maybe it's just choppy for others, but you're
Is
doing
it
great.
still
Thank
choppy
you.
for everyone? I'm sorry.
I can hear pretty clear. No, you're good.
Okay,
I can hear you.
absolutely.
I hear clearly too.
Okay, perfect. As I stated that in regards to the the BTC Pay server, I had tried, basically I went through the installing it on our site, my company site, but it was a bit overwhelming on some of the invoicing, and in trying to get others to explain to me how it was, how they did it. I couldn't find enough people who were actually building, who installed the BTC Pay server. From what I've gathered, it was always like, oh, just use a Lightning, or just use, the existing invoicing companies to do the invoicing, and so that was a problem for me. Another thing that I was noticing too is that I think quite a number kind of may have given up because of the taxes. So depending on the jurisdictions of certain countries, I'm assuming that was the case because it became where you're like quite a number of people just started, I guess, were really overwhelmed by the taxes and the rules and the changes that was going on. And another thing is quite a number of people started focusing like on ETH, and so I'm assuming due to users focusing on ETH that it kind of may have resulted where a number of people are not coming into the space of Bitcoin per se and making transactions. But on the ETH side, on NFTs, then that was happening. So I saw both the transition, because I am kind of both in that space. And so I do run a creative design agency. And so I thought having the BTC Pay server would be a great, which I'm still trying to install and trying to make it as seamless as possible, but it's very cumbersome. And the only person that I was following, there's a couple of people I was following on YouTube, but they weren't really great at tutorials. So, but yeah, I think that could help, better tutorials. And what else? I think that's about it for now that I could think of. And I'm in the States, so I'm a Canadian, just so everyone knows. So I'm in North America. So
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing. And I think that's something I also came across is people don't really know that resources exist, that there's a chat and people will come and help you on Mattermost and that the tutorials exist at BTC Pay server. And I think that's probably something that we could do better is figuring out ways to connect merchants with these resources and know how they can talk to people when they're feeling overwhelmed because I don't think you're alone in that. And I would love to talk to you about your experience more. I think you could really add to this conversation, hopefully add to building out this design guide section. But if anybody else wants to jump in too with their experience, I don't know if John's is able to talk at all, but I do think he had some good notes and Pavlinix wanted to see his perspective as well. So if anybody else wants to jump in, now's your time.
Hey, I'm there. Yeah. This is first off great initiative on this. I'm really excited to see some more merchant stuff. Actually, going into El Salvador for the adopting Bitcoin conference and seeing how like the whole country is now coming on board and with Bitcoin. And most of them through this Chivo wallet. Um, the importance of like non-custodial solutions really was highlighted to me. And in Latin America, in the Caribbean, where I'm from, some African and Asian countries, this kind of like I'm sure it's also like not only those places. You have I'm sure it happens in Europe and the States as well. But in those prior places that I described, the family unit is kind of like really strong, and people end up sticking together quite often, living in the same house or on the same kind of like property and stuff like that. And I'm even seeing it here in Trinidad and where I'm at now. And and this concept of kind of like Uncle Jim came up, where the Uncle Jim model is like it assumes that one person in a social group is technical enough to be able to like run some kind of like infrastructure like BTCP or a Bitcoin node or whatever that everyone else can start using. And I think there's a great opportunity in El Salvador for BDCP server. The uses that I saw whilst there tended to be something like I can't remember the name of the company, but they were some company providing some hosted solution of BDCP server and doing some liquidity provisioning and management and stuff for that customer, and they were using the POS system and stuff. So it's but what do you do if you're like running this yourself, right? So you're gonna have server costs, you're gonna have like you're gonna need someone to like set up the software. The server cost is gonna be it could be like between $5 to $10 depending on like if the like $5 to $20 depending on if the um the blockchain data is stored on the same machine or if it's like being queried remotely by some API, right? So and then you're gonna need someone to like set up the software. Now I think this was the easiest part because I did the setup and it was surprisingly easy to just like run some Docker containers and have BDC Pay service set up. I think I did it in like less than an hour. And on like a DigitalOcean instance. So that was really great. But then you get to the tricky parts now, which are not like a bit less understood by many people, which is the liquidity provisioning. Where do you get those initial channels from, right? And then the liquidity management and channel balancing part. So these parts, I know there's like a plugin ecosystem for BTC Pay Server, but those services, that liquidity still has to come from somewhere. So it's one thing to like set up the server and the software and everything, get everything synced up, create the account, but then you have like, how do you get connected to the Lightning Network actually, right? I think this is some big challenges that we're gonna have to figure out, and it's not only with BTC Pay Server, it's just ecosystem wide. I'm also quite interested in these hosted solutions like Voltage.cloud and stuff like that, which are providing hosted solutions. I think Linode, and there's one other one that I came across that has kind of like this one click installs onto a server, like a hosted server, managed server. So yeah, I'm very excited about the research. I'm very interested in seeing what comes out of it. It's super needed, and I think if we can have like this shared custody approach as well for people using BTC Pay Server outside of the merchant context as well, it would be quite interesting. But yeah, that's I have nothing else specific to say about it.
That was awesome. Thanks, Johns. Anybody else want to add to the conversation? If not, I'll just leave a few minutes at the end for questions, or if anybody has anything that wasn't on the agenda they'd like to discuss, projects, anything they need help with. But for now, we can wrap this up unless anyone else has anything they would like to add. Cool. Then I'll just open the floor to anyone who would like to talk about projects they have or notes from our newsletter. If anybody would like to go through topics that weren't covered, things in the new year they'd like to work on, we can definitely use the space for questions and just free thought. All right. Well, DM was going to talk about accessibility. I think something might have happened, so we can maybe cover accessibility on the next meeting. But I think that's about it then, guys. It's a good conversation today. Cool. We can wrap up the spaces then. Thanks, you guys. See you next time.